Hi, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Whether you're watching a video or listening to a podcast, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. Links to videos or MP3 files can be found on MiamiGhostChronicles.com or go to MarlenePardo.com for information on new book releases. I narrate several podcast series that can be found on major podcast platforms and can also be listened to via Alexa, Sonos, and other home systems. Look for Supernatural Storytime for scary storytelling, Nightshade Diary for classic horror and adventure stories, Stories of the Supernatural for interviews with different guests on the show. If you want to get noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird, you can visit Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at MiamiGhostChronicles.com or find us on Blogspot. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi, everybody. It's Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, Stories of the Supernatural. How's everybody doing today? Good, I hope. Everything is good for me here. As I said before, it's Halloweeny time. It's my birthday month, and my birthday just passed. A week ago? I lose track of times. I know there's going to be a little bit staggered, and maybe some of you will hear it by Halloween. But either way, yep. And I gave in today. I always complain that they're trying to make Christmas too early. It's like, hello, can we just stagger this a little bit? Like in Halloween, autumn, Halloween, Thanksgiving, and then Christmas. And of course, nah. So I gave in because what happened was when I moved up here, I got rid of all my Christmas decorations. I didn't have that many because I had dwindled some stuff. Let's face it, all my kids are grown up. You do a lot of stuff when you have children. But anyway, it was so overwhelming, all the stuff that we had to move, that I got rid of everything. And I said, you know what? I promised myself that once I'm there, I'm going to get all new stuff. And when we got here, basically Thanksgiving of last year, it was forget it. We were living out of box. It was too crazy. So this time I was able to buy all my Christmas stuff all over again. It was, nothing big, smaller trees, but I got some really like pink stuff, and it's like, it's supposed to be red and green, but it's like, no, it's Marlene's Christmas version. So I got some pink decorations, a lot of cute stuff, So yeah, that's what I did today. I gave in, even though it's only October. I said, yeah, you know what? I'm gonna get what I like, because I know the way it works is you like it, you go back to get it, and of course it's gone. So anyway, and of course, as far as Chicken World is concerned, everything is good in Chicken Kingdom. Like I told everybody, I'm not gonna let anybody hatch chicks, because it's already the cold weather starting to set in. It drops down into the 60s, 50s at night. And I really don't feel like putting chicks in a brooder. And I know that some hens are really good, but I just don't feel like going through that again. I think I mentioned it last time, I did lose two of my last batch of chicks. Two of them I lost to hawks. I'm thinking it was a hawk. Even though the other day I saw this cat just amble along across the property, just walking. And it's really funny because all the chickens are going around them, and he's just walking along. And it's like, oh, all right. I wonder if it was you, because they were, even though the chicks weren't that small, but they're bantam. So in and of themselves, even full grown, they're smaller. So I don't know. Let's see. But anyway, that's where I'm at with that. And one thing I did want to mention to you guys, if you want to, you can sign up for my newsletter. I have a weekly newsletter that comes out, and in it I put, some interesting article. I put related podcasts. If I have anything as far as any of my books that are coming out, or the announcement, it's going to come out in my newsletter. So please go to MiamiGhostChronicles.com or MarlenePardo.com, and you can sign up for my newsletters, and just once a week. All right. And of course, let me tell you something. If into the paranormal is your bag, baby, that's where you're going to find it. Anyway, let's get on to the good part. The good part is who I have as a guest. This gentleman, this is his first time here, and I'm very excited to welcome him. His name is Andre R. Frattino. Okay, he is a professional illustrator and storyteller. He's worked in a variety of mediums, from published graphic novelist to ghost tour guide in Savannah, Georgia, to reality television and podcast personality. He's a visual storyteller, and he uses his skills in both writing and illustrating to work on a variety of projects, both personal and commercial. He is the creator of the Florida-focused graphic novel series, The Flagler's Few, and he's worked with clients including the New York Times bestselling authors Shelley Fraser Mickle, Infinite Energy, and Firehouse Subs. He currently resides in Savannah, Georgia, with, I love this, with his amazingly talented wife, two furry rascals, and a school of koi fish. He moonlights as a walking ghost tour in his free time. And I was already talking to him. It was, believe me, we got a lot to talk about. Help me welcome him. How are you doing today, Andre?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me, Marlene.
On the contrary, my pleasure. I'm going to ask you, Andre, what I ask most of my guests. Obviously, you're doing the ghost tours. But did you ever have your own personal experience before you ever started doing the tours?
Yeah. So, I've always been into the paranormal since I was a child.
Okay.
And, I think I watched this documentary once about archaeologists who always say, any modern archaeologist that would tell you today that they weren't partially inspired to be archaeologists by watching Indiana Jones would be lying to you.
That's
and
right,
I think that the same could be said for most ghost hunters. Paranormal investigators would say that partly to be inspired by it was likely Ghostbusters. So I grew up watching Ghostbusters, the cartoon, the movie. I couldn't do horror movies growing up, but Ghostbusters was, doable somehow. And then I, don't often share this, but, I'll definitely share it with you and your podcasters, is that, in 2005, before I attended the Savannah College of Art and Design, where I earned a degree in comic books, my father had passed away. And it was really sudden and unexpected passing. And before he passed away, I remember that we were taking a drive in a car. I had just been accepted to the university. And, we were talking. He was proud of me. He was very happy I was going to the university. But it's very expensive. It was a very pricey school. And, he was a chef, and my mother was a ballet teacher / elementary school teacher at the time. And he said, look, no matter what happens, I will get you to that university. We don't think much of it in the car. It's just whatever, okay, thanks, Dad. I appreciate it. And then, the conversation turned to a surgery he was having coming up. And, he was a little uncertain about the surgery just because he didn't like the idea of surgery. And I don't like the idea of surgery. And I remember he went in for the procedure. There was complications that arose from the procedure. And when he came out, he was having difficulty breathing. And I remember that night I was supposed to go out with my girlfriend to a club. We were going to go party. And I asked my dad before I left, I said, do you need me to stay? Do you want me to go? He waved me off, said, go ahead and go. And so I went out. And that night I had checked my watch, which was a brand new watch. I had just bought it maybe a few months before. And the watch lit up 10:58 and then just died completely, suddenly. And I was like, God, that's really bizarre. I don't know why. It's a brand new watch. So I drove home that night. It was especially foggy. I've always had this thing about the fog. I'm not as sensitive or anything like that. But when there's a lot of dense fog, it always allows your mind to really kind of,
sure, of course,
and imagine. And I found out that he had passed away while I was at the party. And the next couple of days, everything was a blur. But the next couple of days, we went to deal with some of the, death certificate stuff. And it turned out he had died very closely to that 10:58 moment.
I was about to say, yeah.
Ever since then, I never replaced the battery on the watch. I held the watch. I've always had it. A few years ago, my wife put my dad's ashes into the watch for me as a gift, which I was really, that brought a tear to my eye. But after he passed, a lot of people were like, oh my gosh, what are you going to do? Are you going to still go to college? Are you going to do, go to SCAD? What is going to happen? I didn't know. I had two younger sisters and a mom, and I didn't want to leave my family alone in Florida and go up to Georgia. And even though it's not far away, it's just, I didn't think we could afford it. And so I remember that I tried for different scholarships. Nothing took. Everything was too little money for what I needed. And finally, I was told by my admission rep, they go, look, there's a brand new scholarship. All you have to do is write about why it's important to go to the university for you. And so I wrote about my dad. I submitted it in and forgot about it. And a few months later, I was like, you know what? I'll apply to University of Central Florida because we're from Gainesville originally. I figured UF isn't really known for the animation or arts or graphic design, really.
Right.
But UCF had a really good record. And the moment I started to apply for that job, I got an email from SCAD that said, congratulations, you're the recipient of the SOS scholarship.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, what is this? Like 5,000, and that wasn't enough. Trust me. I mean, I wish it was, but it wasn't. $45,000 a year to go to the school at that time. It was full tuition for as long as I stayed on campus or off campus. I didn't have to I could take as few or as many classes as I wanted. It was the perfect scholarship, Marlene. It was the holy grail of scholarships. And, you know, I remember people telling me, like, don't worry, you know, your father's with you. Remember, you all, you know, miracles happen. And I'm not religious, you know. I'm
but I know you're just thinking,
I'm just like, yeah, okay, well, thank you, you know. And here it was this thing. And I remember my dad had told me, he said, no matter what happens, which was just such foreshadowing that neither of us could have predicted. He says, I will get you to that university. And so, you know, he did.
That's
and
such a great
my
story.
very first
It was his story that you wrote about.
Yeah. And then
I bet you that whoever reviewed that the application, when they read that, I'm sure that something very,
I'm absolutely sure
what's the word I'm looking for? Heartfelt.
Yes. And it absolutely resonated with them, I'm sure. But, you know, it was from going to that college. Am I disappeared here? Do you see me?
No, there you go. You came back. Oh, it's okay.
Sorry.
It's all right. Don't worry about it.
From that book, from my education at SCAD, I dedicated my very first book to my father, which was The Reaper of St. George Street, which was the first of the Flagler Few graphic novel series that Pineapple Press had published started in 2012. So, it was full circle. And I don't tell that story often.
What a great story that is, as far as that. Yeah, because the thing is, you think about it, for your dad to say that, it's typically, though, what parents will tell their kid. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Don't worry. You know, I'll do whatever it takes to make sure you go. But you just never at that moment imagine what was going to come after.
No, there was no telling.
Afterwards.
That was completely unfathomable.
Wow. So what happened? You went to school and it was in this is how you ended up in Savannah then?
Yes. So it was 2005. I left home. I went to Savannah. It's only 3 hours from Gainesville. And
is this how you ended up in Savannah?
Yes, this is how I ended up in Savannah. Can you see and hear me? I'm sorry. It might be a connection issue.
Yeah. You're good. You're good. Don't worry.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I ended up in Savannah in 2005.
There you go.
I attended the college for sequential art, which is comic book illustration. And while I was there, a friend of mine was working as a local ghost tour guide, and she said, "Hey, do you want to give ghost tours?" And I was like, I had already been doing ghost investigations for the past, 3 to 4 years. So I was like, sure, I love this. This is right up my alley. And that was 2005, and this is 2021, and I'm still giving ghost tours.
Wow.
Yeah.
So obviously you do like to do it. It wasn't just something that you do like when, you're going to college and you need to make money somehow.
Marlene, I would say that ghost tours have kind of been another part of like what saved me through my life.
Why do you say that?
When I started it was a part-time job. At one point in a downtime, it was my full-time job. Now it's a totally just fun-time job. And I wouldn't still be doing it if I didn't enjoy, meeting new tourists, talking about the paranormal, hearing about their own individual stories, and then just really, it's a decompressor at the end of the day, after a hard day's work. And, you come home and go, all right, I'm going to grab myself a drink at the local bar. I'm going to walk these tourists through a 2-mile hike, and we're going to just talk ghosts. And so it's been there the whole time. It's been a rock for me. And I'll do it until the day I can.
Because let me ask you, I know you said it was like a walking tour, but I know that some, there's now the tours, what they call the pub crawl, that also takes you through basically have a drink and listen to ghost stories. Do you do that too?
Yeah. So when I started doing ghost tours back in 2005, I did the family friendly tours. And then I did that for a number of years. And then I transitioned into the pub crawls. So I do primarily the pub crawls now. And that
Okay.
constitutes the same amount of ghost stories, but directed near bars. So we will do at least 3 or 4 bars in a night. And, some of those bars are haunted, some of them aren't. But the spirits that they'll find at those bars will definitely help kind of get the creative, imaginative juices rolling so that they can experience the ghost down on the street.
Let me ask you something. Are any of the pubs or drinking spots, drinking holes you go to, do they have any reputation? Because I know Savannah is like, where do you go that's not haunted? It's like, imagine some of them are haunted.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So one of the particular bars that we like to visit is called the 1790. And the 1790 Inn and Restaurant was built not in 1790, but in 1820. And it was built by a man named Mr. Powell. And he built it as both his private home and as a boarding house for his sailors, because he was a sea merchant. And he figured when his merchants were in town, he could board them in his house and save himself some money. Okay. So at the age of 65, he took himself a young wife. Her name was Anna. And when he met this wife and he took her in, he was a terrible husband. Never mind that she was 13 years old. He was 65.
What? Wait.
Yeah.
1365.
Well, it was the 1800s.
I know, but I believe it or not, because I do a lot of historical research, and you find that was common as far as the 20 and 25-year difference sometimes in ages. But boy, let me tell you,
50 something odd years in difference. And
so surprisingly, they did not get along. Is that what you're?
Oh no, it was terrible. He had beat her. He had locked her up in rooms by herself. He sent her down to the river to check in the ships in the middle of the night. And so she was miserable. And then one day a ship came in that had been battered off the Georgia coast. It had to undergo about 3 months worth of repairs. And during that 3 months, Mr. Powell had invited his crew to come stay at this house, including a young sailor who was the nephew of the sea captain. And he was 16 years old. Anna at that time was also 16. And when the two of them met each other, it was like fireworks.
Wow.
And they kindled a relationship for the next 3 months, all underneath the nose of Mr. Powell. And then the day that the night before they were supposed to disembark, the young boy comes to Anna and goes, Anna, I don't want to leave you. I want you to come with me. We can sneak you out in the middle of the night. Mr. Powell never find out. We'll be long gone. We'll be out to sea. And so Anna agreed. And the only tragedy of the system was that the young sailor had gone to his captain, and his captain, being his uncle, said, oh, yes, we've seen the way Mr. Powell treats her. It's very unchristian-like. We'll sneak underneath the cover of darkness. But before doing so, you must go to your fellow sailors, because it is believed to be bad luck to have a woman on board a ship. Right. So he goes to his sailors. They all agreed. They're like, yeah, let's get Anna out of here. Nobody liked Mr. Powell. And they were drinking in the bar, the same bar that I take people into today. And 1 drink led to 5, and 5 drinks led to 7, 7 drinks led to 10. Loose lips sink ships. And these sailors started the joke about how they were going to sneak Anna out of the city. And nobody realized that Mr. Powell was inside the bar with them when they made that joke. So that night, the young boy comes over to pick up Anna, and he's greeted with 2 pistols pointed straight at his head. And, Mr. Powell backs him out in the middle of the road and says, you don't get out of here. I'm going to blow your brains away. And so, the young boy takes off in the night, but not before he sees Anna pounding on the window above, looking down at him. And he goes, Anna, wait for me, my love. I'll return. And takes off. Next morning, Anna's body was found at the end of the road. She had jumped headfirst, committing suicide out that window.
Supposedly.
Now, the oddity of the situation is that, the only person who could contest to that happening was Mr. Powell. So the idea is that perhaps Mr. Powell had killed and beaten and killed his wife, and then threw her body out the window to, hide the fact that he had murdered her.
Sure.
And, to this day, the room that Anna supposedly had jumped from got a waiting list around the block, because paranormal enthusiasts from around the country and the world want to stay in that room. It said, you never leave that room without your own personal paranormal experience.
Wow.
Men had women's hands, stroking through their hair at night when they have no women in the bed with them. Women have said that they've had their lingerie mysteriously go missing. Men and women have been awoke in the middle of the night by the crying of a little girl sitting at the foot of their bed. And the moment the little girl notices that she's being watched, she disappears. And then down in the basement, and also, by the way, it's so famous on a place that even Miley Cyrus had tried to stay there one night. I knew a Black Ops Army Ranger who tried to stay there one night. He couldn't make it through the whole evening. Said he got a bad feeling from staying in that room. But down in the basement, next to the bar, is a fantastic restaurant that I always recommend people go to. But it's not uncommon for guests at the restaurant to ask the waiters about a man dressed in what looks to be a 19th century sailor uniform, going around from table to table, not saying anything, but just looking at the women at the table. And people oftentimes mistake it as a, maybe some sort of funky ghost acting. But it's possible that that's the young boy having returned back, still searching for Anna all these centuries later. So, yeah, that's a really popular one on my stops. And a lot of tourists love to go in there and see the rooms and look up at the room.
And just out of curiosity, what Mr. Powell did, of course, which I have a feeling he was responsible in one way or another. He probably died of old age, asleep in his bed.
I believe the legend doesn't really state what happened to Mr. Powell, but I assume he did die maybe after. And maybe his ghost haunts that place out of vengeance.
All right, but he got away with it. Come on. As
most men did back then. So,
well, back then it was one of those things, but that's I hate to say it, but that wasn't that uncommon.
No, that's the funny thing is when tourists all gasp at me about like, oh my God,
yes.
13 and 65. I was like, hey, this was the time she was betrothed to this guy. I mean, her father sold. And
right. I was gonna say there were especially I'm thinking without knowing the particulars of her family of origin, they had to have been okay with it.
I mean, back then, no birth control. I mean, they might have had 5, 6, 7 kids, and they just needed to sell them off to anywhere they could to make ends meet. So
it's like, somebody was willing to marry her, and if he had some type of money, it was like she'll be taken care of, and whatever.
It was tragic.
I was like, yeah.
So that's
a very
hot spot that a lot of tourists like to go to, and it's been featured on a lot of investigations. And there's quite a few different hauntings that take place in that building.
I mean, now that Halloween's coming up, I imagine, have you ever noticed whether it's the full moon or someday like Halloween or any other trend where there's sightings or it's just something different when you do the tours that you can say, when when these things happen or in this time of the year, I notice that activity is up.
Right. Well, as most of us in the investigative world like to believe, one theory is that, ghosts are really just energy. It's not anything supernatural, but maybe some sort of untested or unprepared scientific explanation for it based off of the energy levels. And we all know that like a crowd of people can be influenced by certain energies. If you're in a crowd and there's a lot of anger in the crowd, then you yourself might feel anger. If there's a lot of levity in a crowd, there's a lot of happiness. And the same thing I think can happen around the Halloween season. When people are in the spirits, when people are into it, even those who dress up in costumes and run around the neighborhood are only purporting and stirring and developing and boiling over that sort of supernatural energy that could, maybe enhance the experiences that people have. But that same token, we could be matrixing it, the fact that we're looking so hard for that to be happening during Halloween, like we look for the happiness and the levity of Christmas season, that everyone's own group spirits and everyone wants to, do well by each other. It's the same thing in Halloween. If we're all out there to scare each other, we're going to look for the fright wherever we can find it in any unknown shadow. But I do think, I agree with you. I mean, during this time of the year, I feel that when the temperature drops and it becomes a little breezier out there, just as I mentioned earlier, I'm not a believer in the sort of psychic element of the paranormal investigations, but I gotta say, like when it's a foggy night or a windy night,
the setting is
just something about it that just
what is it that they call it, the setting for every novel, it was a dark and stormy night,
right? Of course, yeah. And that's great. It makes for great storytelling.
Sure.
It makes for great imagination. And I'll tell you that after years of doing investigations, I came to the decision that I no longer wanted to hunt the paranormal for proof, because I feel like chasing the truth chasing that proof diminishes the storyteller aspect of what we're trying to do.
Sure.
And I remember a few years ago, they sent They sent a drone into Loch Ness to scan all of Loch Ness. And they claimed that this would be the definitive scan that would purport once and for all whether or not the Loch Ness Monster truly could exist. And I don't know what the findings were. I don't know. It obviously hasn't changed too much because I think Loch Ness is still getting quite a bit of tourism from it. But reading that article instantly made me realize that it is so important that there are those of us that just want to push the legends, the folklore, and the original stories, because that's what we need in a society. We obviously don't want to have by that same token, we need facts, we need truth, more.
But
so
you know what? I hate to say it, but there's a part of us that likes to romanticize these things.
Right.
And like you said, all of a sudden,
yeah.
all the technology, the drone is like, okay, there isn't anything there.
And it takes away from we grew up in a time. I mean, we were talking earlier about the 1800s and how easily, one occurrence can stimulate and create a whole fear factor for a whole neighborhood. But we have to also remember it was darker then. Historically, everything wasn't connected. We didn't have the internet. There wasn't television. Lamps, lamp posts that were gas lit were the only things that really provided light at the end of the night. So there is an aspect to, we know so much now through so much brightness that it's good to keep a little bit of the spookiness that we don't know.
Well, no, what I was gonna get into right before the internet decided to have its way with us, that when I remembered now, it was the Gribble axe murder, which was that location where the 3 women were killed, and it was never solved, even though one of the husbands or the ex-husbands did do some jail time and he was pardoned. But there was always a feeling that somehow, for lack of a better word, he was a patsy, in the sense of they needed to arrest somebody for 3 women that were basically killed horribly. Mm-hmm. And that they demolished the house, and then they built that trolley tour company. And you were telling me before we started to record that you had your own experiences while you were there in that building, or where it used to be at, in other words.
Yeah. So for a brief time while I was in Savannah, I worked for a company that was working for Old Town Trolleys, doing their ghost and gravestone management for their tourism. And what they did is they hired a few of us to kind of manage the trolleys at night. So I literally drove around in a vehicle with a walkie-talkie and would signal the different trolleys on their routes, make sure everything was being done appropriately. We had different stage stops for the trolleys along the way, so we had to make sure everything was working like clockwork. But at the end of the night, the trolleys would come back to this trolley barn that was built on the land that the Gribble house had been demolished on. And, I personally, I had some experiences there, but I was told by tour guides, drivers, and even mechanics who'd worked there in the evening that at a certain point they had to get out of the barn. Like they just couldn't be there after a certain time at night. Some of these were really stone-walled, like pretty stiff, like strong people that you wouldn't expect to feel that way. But I remember talking to one mechanic who said he felt like he was attacked, by a spirit. I had people say that they saw shadow figures dancing between the trolleys at night. And, what was always really weird and bizarre for me when I would be running the trolley company is that at the end of the evening, I would literally be the last person there. So we're talking 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning, the trolleys would come in. And every night the trolleys would come in, it was like playing a game of Tetris. Because the trolley barn had to store, I think, like 30 trolleys. And these are big freaking buses, So they'd have to store these trolleys, and you'd be amazed how they could just compact all these trolleys into the barn. But every night it was literally a labyrinth that would transform. So one night, some trolley would be this way, one trolley would be that way, one trolley would be sideways, 2 catty-cornered, whatever. But I would have to set the alarm on one half of the building and then run through the barn, not out of fear, but because the barn was so large, you had to set the alarm, and you were given like a 2-minute window to get the hell out.
Oh, that's right. It's got like a delay of only a certain amount of time, right?
Yeah. It was like trying to set a bomb and then run away.
Yes.
Like the movies are like, we got 30 seconds. We got to get to the chop. So I would run through the barn.
The chopper.
Yeah, get to the chopper now. So I would have to run through the barn to get to the other side. Well, every night it would be a different maze. So I would go right, left, 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 right, and then some nights I'd go right, 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 left, right, 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 left. So it always got to be a little terrifying, because added to that, the just background subtle fear of knowing that people had told me they had been attacked, or that they had heard voices, or that they saw a shadow on top of the trolley one night. I just always had this sort of like movie fear. That was like, I am literally that character in the beginning of some movie that's going to be about, an axe murderer haunting one of these trolleys who's going to kill me on my way to try and get out of the barn. And that lasted for over a year, of me just having to do these frantic runs through the trolleys to get to
job security. I bet nobody wanted that job.
No, yeah, nobody wanted to stay there at night. And it was a little bit of a weird feeling. And then a year later, after I left, they turned the trolley barn into a haunted attraction, and would give people K2 meters and send them on their way into the barn and say, yep, investigate this empty barn space and see if you can find anything from the Gribble House murders. So it was interesting.
What? Even though as horrible as that murder was, because it was a murder, with an axe, and a lot of people don't realize that area, I think, and I don't know if the railroad's still close to it, but man, let me tell you something. A lot of those railroad yards, they used to have pretty horrible accidents happen to the workers. Mm-hmm. To the brakemen and the guys that were running around there. I mean, sometimes you read about these things, people's legs, their head. I mean, having an accident, if you worked in one of these rail yards, a lot of bad things could happen to you.
Yeah, there was no OSHA during those times. So.
Oh, heck no. It was like, hey, you better be fast on your feet. Mm-hmm. But yeah,
the
you hear about the
right across this. I mean, there's not a working railroad system, but there's now a train museum across the way that's dedicated to the Georgia Railroad system, which was that obvious proponent. That was the system that was existing during the time that the Gribble House would have been there. And as we also talk about, very likely drifters who just probably popped in and out of that, train yard could walk right across the street and find themselves in that home and get themselves an axe. And if they had an inkling to murder, then just there were three women.
Right. And, and as horrible, that's another thing that, they say, as horrible as it sounds to think of an axe murder, an axe that was very common in those times to have around the house, because it was used a lot for different activities in the house. It wasn't like, that why would you have an axe in your house? It was like everybody had an axe in their house. Right. So it was like, it came in handy. That's about it, but yeah,
the axe was as common then as a spatula.
And I remember, what's really now I remember something about that Gribble axe murder. One of the things that they said was that they couldn't understand why nobody heard these women scream, supposedly. In other words, like, what happened? Like, maybe you could kill one of them, but nobody heard a scuffle, nobody heard a scream, nothing like that.
Isn't that the same story to the Amity House murder? I mean, the Amityville murder that occurred.
Oh, yes. They claimed, and you know what? Now that you brought that up, one of the things, whether you believe in the the Feo, when the murder, the Feo family, mm-hmm. Whether you believe that the Amityville horror is haunted or not, with the Lutzes afterwards, that was one of the things that everybody thinks is like, how can nobody in that neighborhood, a residential neighborhood, hear shotgun or bullets, anything,
or never mind,
series of them go off?
How did the family?
Because normally, I imagine that was not a common thing to hear in that neighborhood.
Yeah. So, is there a connection there to these ghastly murders and how they were able to be committed without anybody finding out or experiencing it at the time? I don't know.
Hey, everybody. In case you were wondering what's happening is, I'm sure you heard that we were having some internet problems and we decided to go on the phone. So I've got Andre with me. But before we keep going on the interview, one of the things, because I know that somebody's going to say, I heard there's a banging somewhere in the background. Believe it or not, that's one of my dogs with a bone. I bought a big bone and they all take turns on it. But like children, for anybody who has had children, they have the whole house where they could go and chew on the bone. But no, his name is Jinjin, as in I Dream of Jeannie's dog Jinjin. He must come and sit under my desk with the bone. And when he gnaws on it, it taps, 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 because I know somebody's going to say, hey, what was that weird noise? That's my dog Jinjin being, I I love them to death, but still, it's like, yeah, and what can I say? It's one of those things you can't control animals. But anybody that's been around my interviews knows that weird animal noises show up because I have a lot of animals. But anyway, let's get back, Andre, to the show, to the paranormal. That you were saying that you had to do your basically you had to run through to get to the other side of the building so you could get out of the building because you didn't want to be
Right.
one of those that had your own paranormal experience. And I said also that the railroad yards are infamous, not there in Savannah but everywhere, for very horrendous accidents happening to the people that used to work in those railroad yards. So I wouldn't be surprised if maybe
Right.
it's not the Gribble axe murdered ladies, but somebody that drifted over
Hmm.
to that spot. And sometimes, sometimes it's not who you expect who makes you have weird experiences. And again, we're getting back to Savannah. Have you ever had, when you're conducting these tours, have you ever had an experience that you didn't expect? As far
Yeah.
as
So really, interestingly enough, one of my favorite stories to talk about on my ghost tours is the story of Renee Rondalia Ash, which is the Savannah Monster story, and it's about a boy who was born with a mental disability, but also likely suffered from giganticism, because by the time he was 14 years old, he was about 300 pounds and almost 7 feet tall.
oh,
And he oftentimes was shunned by the public, so he had to play alone in the cemetery by himself. And whenever he left the cemetery at night, people would say that they would find the remains of dead animals in the cemetery, like, squirrels with their heads twisted off their necks, or birds with their wings ripped off their bodies. And it was believed that Rene just really didn't know his own strength and his, sort of playing with these animals.
okay.
But one day they found the body of a little girl who had been twisted and mutilated in the same fashion as Rene's animals. And so they hanged the boy from a square in Savannah, Warren Square. And the story goes that even after his death, the murders persisted. And on top of that, his burial had been pretty much dug up and his body had gone missing. Which, where does a 7 foot tall, 300-pound body go?
Exactly.
So a lot of people believe that Rene still wanders the streets, and there had been, I would tell in my ghost stories, people who had reported being nearly strangled to death in the squares. Now, I had only read about that, really, those experiences. But one night I was giving a ghost tour, and on the tour, these two ladies asked me before we entered into Warren Square, it was right before I was going to tell that story. They said, look, as we were walking through the last square, we felt it difficult to breathe. Like it started off feeling kind of like a slight allergic reaction, but they said for a few moments there, they really were having trouble catching their breath. And they said, is there any experience about people having lost their ability to breathe in the last square? And it didn't dawn on me at first. I was like, well, the last square, Columbia Square, there's nothing there but the Keogh House, and that's a totally other. And then I went, oh, but it is the corridor from where Rene used to walk from Warren Square to the cemetery. So it's possible that anybody walking along the same corridor that Rene did died that same, or experienced that same difficulty of breathing.
Okay.
So the lady proved it for me by saying, like, okay, well, we couldn't breathe over there. And these were three, like, these are three ladies that were not sensitive. They were not, they were not the type of people you would think would be pulling a fast one over you. And they were also the kind that didn't really know a lot about ghosts. So when they said they experienced that and really felt like frightened by it, I was like, well, that's likely Rene. And as I explained the story, it only made them more afraid at the end. But we booked it out of that square pretty quickly after that.
It's like, exactly. And you know what? That's kind of sad, that story, because from what you're saying, they basically accused the wrong person. That's a shame.
Oh, yeah.
That
Well, I
happens
mean, they might have
sometimes.
accused the wrong person. They might have accused the wrong person in the Gribble House murder, too. I mean, you
Yeah,
said
exactly.
that they found a passage for it. And, I mean, when you don't have forensic analysis in those days, it's,
Yes.
it's pretty much she said, and then that's what
Yes.
happened. So, Rene, whether he's stalking the streets looking for his next victim or trying to avenge his death,
Right.
he's a very popular story in Savannah. And on multiple versions of my tours, I've had things unusual happen around that square. The tree limb that he supposedly hanged from suddenly creaking for no reason without any wind or any squirrels in the tree.
Mm-hmm.
I've had people capture photographs of what looks to be a blob hanging from the bottom of the tree, with shoulders and a head on it.
A blob?
I
Oh,
think
you're kidding.
Yeah. I think Renee makes himself pretty visible in that square very often.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is let me ask you, that I can't remember what the name of the cemetery is, the one, of course, that's very famous because it was in the Midnight, the Garden of Good and Evil.
Bonaventure.
The Bonaventure, exactly. Do you do any tours there? Because I know that's a pretty old cemetery, huh?
That is an old cemetery, and I have my thoughts about tours going through cemeteries. So, a few years ago, they started doing a lot more. When I first started in Savannah, there was no nighttime ghost tours in Bonaventure.
Okay.
But in the past few years, I went from being one of only 5 walking ghost tour guides to now being one of 35. And I think anybody who's got the right amount of money that can wave in front of anybody's face will get something, done.
Right.
But I find it to be a bad taste to be giving a tour of 30 people, a haunted tour through a cemetery. You can go in there in the daytime, and it's a beautiful cemetery. It's very spooky in the daytime. There's several ghost stories that are actually based inside the cemetery, one of which being that the cemetery used to be a plantation, and the plantation mysteriously caught on fire one night.
Okay.
And the owner, being a good Savannah host, just took all the plates and all the tables out into the yard, and they just continued drinking and eating while the house burned down. And when they were done with their glasses, they would throw them in. So,
yeah, that's my dog's over the bone. I'm glad I explained that. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but anyway, go ahead.
No, it gave me a chill too. I was like, was that?
You were like, oh. No, that's, of course, it's like, but don't worry, my audience is used to this because, of course.
Well, anyways, people will say that if you go there in the daytime, you close your eyes, you can still hear the murmurs of dinner conversation and the shattering of glasses against trees. But the answer, no, I don't give the tours inside the cemetery. They are available. If you want to go and experience it, that's your own thing. But for me, let the dead lie. And if you want to experience it or pay your respects, go and do it in the daytime. But at night, I think.
Let me answer something. I unfortunately, I've seen, and I don't know if they're doing that in Savannah. And I don't know, because sometimes I've seen that a lot of cemeteries, though, after sundown, they close the gates. That's what I've seen across the board.
Yeah. So Colonial Park Cemetery, which is the one inside the city, the one that Renee played in, they close their gates at dusk.
Right.
And they open again and really that's more for preservation of the cemetery, but also just safety factors. I mean, at Bonaventure, you have to drive to get to, and they close their gates at night as well. But, if you're in the middle of Colonial Park Cemetery, you're in the city, I mean, anybody can be doing anything behind any of those tombstones. And rumor had, right before I moved to Savannah, that there was signs of a satanic ritual in the cemetery.
I wouldn't be
somebody
surprised.
had left a goat's head inside the cemetery, and some practices were being done in there at night, and that was another reason why they locked it, because they used to not lock it every night when I was down there, but that happened when I moved to Savannah.
Right. Yeah. I was, the same thing. I mean, I was born and raised in Miami, and like I said, normally, especially if they were the older cemeteries, nobody ever bothered to lock them because, who would want to go in there at night? But yeah, all the cemeteries I know, they close them, they lock them.
Yeah, and I've heard stories from tour guides who, the network's pretty extensive, but I've heard rumors of people who would give ghost tours in New Orleans in the walled cemeteries, and there's no better way to get yourself mugged. 30 people getting mugged or held up by gunpoint than put them in a walled cemetery where nobody can see outside, and you can just shoot around any corner. So, I mean, it's sometimes you have to worry more about the living than you have to worry about the dead.
Yeah, well, let's face it, that a group of what probably are tourists are bound to have some type of money on them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So it's like, yeah. But I had heard of that. I had heard of that. And God, who was it that told me a few months back that like St. Louis and those older cemeteries that before you could go in there, just on your own, you wanted to stroll through it. Now you can't. You have to pay, and it's almost like you have to pay to get into the cemetery, not because you're on a tour, just because you want to stroll through there. So yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of things
Yeah.
have changed.
I went to St. Louis Cemetery number 4 in the daytime once, the one where Laveau's body is buried.
Right.
And I even was like, I was there with my sister, and I was like, something doesn't feel right. And it wasn't the ghosts.
It was the people.
You're in the cemetery. It was right after Katrina. I was like, you just don't know like what people would be up to in here. Sure. Because it was a perfect place to hide into. So,
Yes.
just probably best to let the dead lie and go find your kicks elsewhere.
Yeah, in case, right. And we don't want to join them, in other words.
Yeah, true. I don't want my wallet to join.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, sometimes it's unfortunate what happens. God, what was it? There was another story that I had heard about Savannah, because Savannah has got such a rich history. Because the thing is that people see these squares and you think of it as being like the city, but historically, sometimes that was the outskirts of the city. Like you said, where Bonaventure used to be, there used to be a plantation before.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these places that now are part of the city used to be rural, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
And let me ask
In
you,
fact,
how
where
about?
I live,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, in fact, where I live right now, up until 1910, was the woods.
Okay.
And now it's only street. It's 5 minutes to downtown from where I live. So,
Right.
yeah, it's definitely spread out from its original plans. General Oglethorpe founded the city in 1733, with the idea of creating a planned city, that all these squares would actually act as military fortifications to protect essentially Charleston and the other British colonies from Spanish Florida, specifically St. Augustine, which is my old stomping ground. And, the thing is that originally it started with 2 squares, it grew to be 4 squares, it grew to be 8 squares, and then by the time all was said and done, it was about, 22, 24 squares that were placed out here. And so some of those outer lying squares used to be the woods at the beginning of the city's construction.
Right. Exactly. And some people forget that.
Yeah.
That what seems there now very, isn't there, God, isn't there also a fort out there? God, I know, what's the name of that fort?
Are you talking about Fort Jackson, or are you talking about Fort Pulaski?
Fort Pulaski.
Yeah.
Is there's
Fort
also,
Pulaski.
go ahead.
No, that's a fun place to visit. I don't know about ghost experiences there, but I'm sure there have been some. But Fort Pulaski is actually, some people say, the real beginning of the Civil War. They always credit Fort Sumter as being the first fort that, fell to the Confederates and what the war. But Fort Pulaski fell to the Confederates months before Fort Sumter. The only difference was Fort Pulaski was only manned by 2 Union soldiers at the time who pretty much just said, okay,
Right.
here's the door, you guys have it. And
Yeah,
so that fort was taken.
Right, because I remember that I was thinking that Fort Pulaski has been there a really long time, and also Tybee Island. There's a lot of interesting places out there. Let me ask you about, and the reason why I'm asking is I know some places get these reputations, and what is that? Was it Moon River Brewery? Yes, that's the name of it.
Yeah, Moon River Brewery.
It's got a haunted reputation, and have you ever had any experiences there?
Now, I personally have never had an experience at Moon River Brewery, but it's accredited as being Savannah's first hotel.
Okay.
The building was constructed as a hotel back in the late 1700s, early 1800s, and when it opened, rumor had it that they had 2 Bengal tigers in cages when you'd walk into the door to the front of this building.
Okay.
But there have been those stories that have ranged at that building from, poker matches that have ended up in a bloody duel to a bride and tumbled down the stairs and broke her neck. And they say that the ghosts of both are still haunting this place. As Moon River Brewery, it's been a restaurant, in Savannah for years and years and years. And at first they used to let the ghost tours come through the restaurant.
Right.
And you could go down to the basement or go up to the upstairs. The first story is the restaurant proper. And if you walked in it, it just looks like a restaurant. But when you get to the second level and you look up to the third level, it is in absolute decay, where it's still the original wallpaper.
Wow.
It's still the original doors. It's crusty. It's falling apart. It's just the perfect setting for a haunted house, which is a lot of places in Savannah. You'll see some houses you'll drive by and you'll be like, that looks like a beautiful house, but only the exterior has been restored and the interior is still, rotting away and hasn't really found itself yet. I investigated a house just like that in Savannah. But, they used to let people go in the Moon River. I've had friends of mine who worked at Moon River who said that they would be shadow people in the basements, that they actually had them follow them up the stairs. I've heard other tour guides tell me that they've had tourists pushed down the stairs by what looks to be a woman in white.
I know somebody. It's like, and you could tell. But anyway, keep going.
But no, the experiences are still there. But unfortunately, I've heard that the restaurant's just not up with the ghost hunting coming through it anymore, because you'd have 30 people trudging right through your
I was going to say, as popular as ghost tours have become, I could see where it could be a problem. But, it's really weird because all these places that have these haunted reputations, usually the basement is the place nobody wants to go to. It's like any place but the basement. You want me to get the cups, the whatever, the napkins, or in the basement? Like, we're going to have to draw straws for this.
Right. And the basement's now an event space. So they actually have like wedding receptions in the basement. I've been to a wedding reception in the basement.
Really?
And the fact that you just could be having your wedding reception next to maybe a couple of shadow people, and maybe just part of the Savannah charm. But
you're taking your wedding pictures, or you're looking at your wedding video, and all of a sudden you see these. Wow, that'd make it a memorable thing.
We invite these people. I don't know, but
it happens.
But the thing is, people still that they ask me on my ghost tour, we going by Moon River, and I have really never given people tours of Moon River. I've done it once or twice, but at the end of the day, they just want to go in because it's one of the few places that used to let people come in.
Right.
And really no ghost tours anymore. It's a liability to go in some of the houses and buildings.
Let me ask you something, Andre. If I remember correctly, and I don't know if you know the story behind this, isn't there a statue there, right there by the river, of a girl she's waving like a cloth or something?
Yeah.
What is that?
It's called the Wailing Girl.
Mm-hmm.
And the Wailing Girl myth is that it, for many, many years, in the early 20th century, a woman used to wave a sheet at the passing ships that would come in and out of the port.
Okay.
Because Savannah's a big port town. Mm-hmm. And the legend goes that, she was waving them down. She was looking for her lost husband who had been lost at sea and hadn't come home. And some people say that actually that's not the truth, that it was, a sister and her brother had gone off into, the sea and never came home, and his ship had sunk. And she just kept waiting and hoping that one day somebody would, recognize her or come find her. And so she waved it for years until she became her own legend. And that statue was placed up there, memorial for her. Some people will still say, like, as the port ships come in and out, that they see a woman down there with her dog, because the statue actually has a dog with her.
Right. Yes, you're right.
That she's still out there waving ships in and out of the port. But of course, nobody knows of anybody going down there waving the ships in and out, other than that statue. But they say they still see an actual human being down there waving a sheet.
Isn't that interesting? Wow.
Oh, yeah.
Like, the mystery is in the
There's
actual origins in and of itself also. As to why she would do that.
Fun origin out there on the, out on River Street, which is not too far away from the Wailing Girl statue, is a square that we call the Whispering Square. Okay. And if you stand in the middle of the square, look out at the river, and you talk you hear your own voice whisper back into your ear, almost as if you're in a sound booth. But it's literally just a run-of-the-mill. If you'd walk by it, you would never have thought kind of square. Not even a square, like a little plaza that's just facing the riverfront, connected to the whole pavilion. And I've had friends of mine who are sound design majors come out there and take a look at the spot, and they can't tell me what's causing it. Theory is that there's a wind tunnel that's underneath the plaza that leads out into down below into the tunnel system. But the question is what is it doing there, and why has it been structured like this? So it's another little fun Savannah mystery paranormal happening that people like to kind of push around, but it's a lesser known one.
Right.
So
That's
for any
very
of your
unusual.
listeners,
I've never heard of that.
Inside tip. Yeah, that's a cool one too.
And
even more bizarre than, I'll tell you this other quick little story.
Yes.
I had when I was a student dad, I had one of my professors tell me, hey, I know you're into the ghosts. He says, go to the Birkenstocks shoe store, which no longer exists on Savannah's main drag, which is Broughton Street. If you go down there now, there's like everything from like, a Gap and a McDonald's. The Victoria's Secret used to be on that street. A lot of restaurants, a lot of cafes. It's like the main Fifth Avenue for Savannah. But when you go down, he says, go to the Birkenstocks, ask the manager if you can look at the basement below, the dungeons. And I go, oh, okay, I don't know what that, but I'll check it out. So I went to the Birkenstocks and I asked the manager, I was like, my professor told me to come down here and tell you his name, and he said you would take me downstairs, look at the dungeons. I had no clue what he was talking about, but the manager goes, okay, follow me. And he took me to the room where they keep all the shoes, where you just assume that if they don't have a size 9, they can go back there and get you one.
Right.
When they opened the doors, it was literally an archaic staircase that went down into the basement. And as you got down to the basement, it was vaulted. The whole basement was vaulted like a dungeon. And in fact, it had gone so far to having literal hooks still in the wall. And he stated that at one point in time, they actually had kept slaves down here and chained them to the walls. And that they had done investigations down there, and that many psychics have claimed that there is a little boy who's complaining of stomach problems, who's still down there haunting the basement. In fact, on the riverfront, there are alcoves over there that were where they unloaded the slaves off of the ships and stuck them in these alcoves.
This is right next to the river, right?
Yeah, right next to the river. Actually, right next to the Hyatt, in fact.
Okay.
And you can see this. Go to the Hyatt, you can walk right up to it and see these alcoves, these little compartments they used to, force the slaves into. And in fact, many of the stones on the riverfront are old ballasting stones from the slave ships that they just left on the river after they unloaded the ship.
You know what? I've heard that.
So anyway, we investigated this little downstairs dungeon, and there was even. Yeah, it's terrible, but I mean, it's just.
Of all places, a Birkenstock shop
hidden behind the veneer of tourism.
That's incredible.
I know, right?
Can you imagine somebody you're going to rent a space for your shoe shop, and it's like, oh yeah, but by the way, okay, wow, yeah. That is unusual.
And they had painted the walls great. Yeah.
What color had they painted the walls?
Yeah, they painted the walls haint gray or haint blue.
Oh, right. Okay, I was about to ask you that. Haint blue?
Culture. Yeah, haint blue. So the idea is within the Gullah and the Geechee cultures of, Georgia, many of the slave cultures that had come over from Africa, the idea was that ghosts cannot pass over the water. So this haint blue was painted on a lot of houses to ward off evil spirits because they pass the ocean or pass the water. So so they painted the walls the haint blue color, either to keep the spirits in or to keep it out. I don't know.
Just in case.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, Andre. Even now, do you see houses that still use that color? I know which color you're talking about.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So people still kind of believe in it, huh?
My house is my deck leading to my front door is painted haint blue.
Just in case.
So, just in case.
You want to make sure nobody follows you home. It's like, all right, don't bother because.
Well, my occupation, it's very common for ghosts to follow you home. So, it's never a bad idea to have a little good juju on your side.
Of course. Have you had anybody ever follow you home? Now that you brought that up.
I've never had that experience, but I always end my ghost tour at the end of the night by telling people that while we sometimes take tours of the dead, it can't be said the dead don't sometimes take tours of the living. So I always tell them, like, when they follow you home, just make sure they tip you extra well.
Right, and you're like, hey, by the way, if anybody's going to get followed, it's like, pick one of the tourists here, but not me.
Pretty much. I guess
let me ask you, have you any of your coworkers, because I have heard that, not even so much whether it's tour operators or even docents, sometimes these supposed hauntings, they kind of like feel friendly towards that person that they see there all the time. And then after a while, they kind of like, they start visiting this person's house because it's like almost like we've developed a friendship or, relationship kind of thing.
Right. Well, there's one story of a Rebecca Clark, who was a historian who lived in Savannah in 1993. And she worked frequently downtown in Wright Square, which was the square where Alice O'Reilly was hanged after she gave birth to her child in 1734. She supposedly had murdered her master. She was an Irish immigrant, but she was working for an indentured servitude across the river on Hutchinson Island, and she had murdered her master by drowning him in a bucket of water. And they believed that the child might have actually been his and that he had raped her, and that was why she murdered him. Mm-hmm. But after she was hanged, the child died from, malnourishment. And it's a tragedy, but, this Rebecca Clark, as she was driving home one night, she reported having this sinister feeling of something glaring at her in the back seat of the car. And it followed her all the way back to her house. And as she was trying to sleep that night, she was awoken by her office going berserk, like the lights turning on, the TV, the computer, the radio. And she said that through the echo of the radio and the television and the computer, she could hear a name being called out, and it was her name. It was Rebecca.
Jesus.
And she was terrified. She slammed the door. She cried herself to sleep. Next morning, she woke up. She had to rush back downtown for work. And she said as she was driving downtown, despite it being broad daylight, she had that exact sinister feeling that she had the night before. And that as soon as they entered Wright Square, she said it just evaporated right out of her car. And she thinks that it might have been the spirit of either Alice O'Reilly or another dead soul that was hanged in Wright Square, and that she just, had brought it home with her.
Wow. Let me tell you. Oh. It's like,
yeah.
That right there is like, oh, okay. But I have heard of that. I have heard whether it's paranormal investigators. I've heard of ghost tours. I've heard of docents, people that just, they hang out and all of a sudden it's like, they start having peculiar stuff happen at their houses and it's like, oh, no. It's like, it's not here.
Yeah, it's an occupational hazard, if you're going to be battling in the ghost stories, it's not uncommon for you to become one, but so far, knock on wood,
nobody's decided to hitchhike home with you, huh?
No, not yet. Either I'm not good looking enough or I
Yeah. Well, you know what? Let me ask you, I noticed in your bio that you mentioned that you had worked in a paranormal show. And how did what were you talking about your experiences there in Savannah?
Well, the way the show went down was I'd been finishing a ghost tour one night, and a tourist came up to me and she goes, "Look, you're really good. You should be on Ghost Hunters." And I laughed at her and said, "Yeah, okay, whatever." She goes, "No. There's a brand new show. They're applying. You can apply for it online. All you have to do is just send in a video."
Okay.
So for schools, I went ahead and I sent in a video. I talked about my investigations. I talked about my tour guiding in Savannah, and the show was Ghost Hunters Academy, actually.
Okay,
and
I remember that.
Yeah. And so what happened is I interviewed back and forth for a little while, and the interviewer had said, "Look, I loved your video, but one of the reasons why I wanted to call you was because you grew up in Gainesville, Florida." He's like, "I went to UF." And I go, "Oh my gosh, go Gators." So we literally talked for a little bit about UF, about Gainesville, and then we even shared some ghost stories that we had known about in Gainesville, Florida. And but after 3 or 4 interviews, meeting with some different people, they hired me. And this is the biggest regret of my life, because as they sat me down on the phone, they says, Andre, we want to let you know we're thrilled with you. We can't wait to invite you on the show, Ghost Hunters Academy. But we've got this other great TV show we're developing for TLC. It's called Ghost Intervention. It's about 3 psychics who are going to be like Charlie's Angels, going around, you know, finding ghosts to investigate on the same places Ghost Hunters did. And what we need is like a Bosley type on the show, you know, somebody to go around with some scientific equipment, you know, kind of counter the experiences that the psychics are having, or maybe to validate the experiences that the psychics are having by being the only ghost hunter on this show. And they really pitched it. They laid it on thick, as Hollywood likes to do. They're like, look, you'll be the only guy. These are 3 charming psychics. They're beautiful. They're sexy. You know, I was only 23, 24 at the time. So, like, I was single. I was like, heck yeah, this sounds great. Like, sign me up. And that show lasted literally a pilot episode. The psychics couldn't get along with each other.
Really?
You know, it was just kind of a weird experience. But, you know, that show didn't last. And then Ghost Hunters Academy went on to 6 seasons. And I was like, man, I really picked the wrong 2. But it was still a very interesting experience. And I have to say that, you know, the psychics, as weird and as bizarre as I find psychics to be, and as much as they quirk an eyebrow, you know, it was legitimate what I would see these psychics determine, you know. Like, they would sit down with the families, and the families would break down crying. And I mean, I was there in production the whole time. And at no point did I ever see, like, you know, anybody prep the families. These weren't the kind of families you were prepping to be actors either. Right. You know, the psychics independently investigated their experiences and came together at the end and somehow miraculously came to a lot of the same conclusions. And it wasn't a matter of being like, you have somebody who lived here whose name began with an M, right? Like their first name, their middle name, maybe their last name. It wasn't like that. Right. They were very specifically pinpointing out exact experiences that family members had, you know, to minute detail. And I'd watch as full-grown guys would just fall to the floor crying, you know. Right. And so it was legitimate, you know, whether or not it made, you know, whether or not we were able to get the ball rolling on the show. It was legitimate experiences that these psychics were unturning. And, you know, it was an experience, whether it was a good or a bad experience, it was definitely an experience. And I treasure it for that. So.
Well, you know what? I'm not surprised in a way what you told. I've been doing paranormal investigations since the 1990s. And I'm going to tell everybody, my audience was sick of me saying this, but this was when you had to pay to develop your film. In other words, digital. Yeah. But anyway, people don't realize that sometimes in paranormal investigations and groups, there's what they call paradrama, and this you learn later on, because when I was doing it, it was like you said, not a crowded field. And you know what though? Sometimes, Andre, what I find is people equate being psychic with being nice or sweet. You see what I'm saying? And you might be a great psychic, but you might have a difficult personality.
Right.
People kind of want to, you know, like, you know, that thing about if you're beautiful, you're nice or sweet or something. And you can have, and I've run across some psychics that are, God, they're great. They're like, but sometimes they have difficult personalities. And like, you know how you're saying that they didn't get along with each other? And it's sometimes that kumbaya moment doesn't ever happen. And yeah, I tell everybody.
Well, I think with these psychics, it was hard because they were literally being plucked out of, you know, a casting call. And I don't think that's, you know, you know better than me that when it comes to investigations, you've got to rely on the people that you're working with. Sure. You know, you have to understand them. You have to know them. It's like a partnership, you know? Yes. I mean, it's the same reason why this doesn't work when you watch these like romance reality TV shows where they slap 2 people together who have no chemistry. Right. Like if the psychics have no chemistry, it might make for good paradrama, but at the end of the day, your investigation is going to be stressed because you have 3 people doing things 3 different ways that they don't trust how the other people are doing it. Right. So it was a mess. It was a unique experience, but I think it was one of the experiences that also drew me away from doing investigations after that, because I think that, like, you were doing investigations since before it was popular.
Yes,
you know,
I tell everybody it was quite different. Quite different.
Right.
and I did it before Ghost Hunters came out, but probably like I started in early like 2000, 2001, 2002.
Mm-hmm.
So Ghost Hunters hadn't come out to make it a world phenomenon yet, but it was still not as old as you had been. Like, you know, you had been doing it since the 90s, and people had been doing it since the 70s and 60s.
Exactly.
And those generations were so, it was a laughed at to do it. You know, now everybody wants to be their own paranormal investigative team because they want to be the next Ghost Hunter TV show. Or at least it was in the 2000s. Like, I remember almost every network had its own paranormal TV show.
Right.
And like every state had its own 3 or 4 or 5 paranormal investigative teams that claimed they were the team. Twitter had just come out, you know, social media was blowing up. Everybody who had a baseball hat and a t-shirt that was like, you know, embroidered with their team name on, suddenly they were the go-to investigators. And the thing is that, you know, I realized after being on the paranormal show that I was like, it's, you know, ghost hunting is really a quiet, solitary, it's like collecting stamps, or it's like bird watching. You know, you have to have a lot of patience, and you have to be ready for there not to be anything there.
Oh, sure. And that's the part a lot of people, when they decide that they want to investigate, like, you know, you have to sometimes give up your weekends and sometimes be bored to tears. They're like, I didn't know it was like this.
And then you have to go home, and then and then you have to double that time when you go home and watch and read and listen to all the content that you collected over that weekend. So, you know, everybody wants to be on these shows because they all think it's like glamour and glitz, and you're going to experience a ghost at every investigation. But at the end of the day, you know, it really is not that. And I think this show kind of took a little of it out of me and just made me realize that the ghost stories are more my route. As a storyteller, I want to purport the legends, not debunk the legends. So
yeah, well,
for that
you know
reason,
what?
I decided.
I tell everybody, I said, look, back in the 90s, by the time, even though there was like ghost hunters, the way we look at it now, that's not what it's not what it is now. But anyway, I say, by the time you got contacted, more than likely there was something going on. And I to explain, back then when people had weird noises or whatever was going on, they would investigate. They would try to figure it out. Like, is it an animal? Is it the plumbing? Is it the pipe? What is it? You know, they would really, you know, they were not thinking it's paranormal. Eventually, you know, it sometimes turned out. I'd say now, fast forward 20 years, anybody hears something in the back room and the whole family runs out and sleeps in the car, and nobody dares to investigate because they're sure that it's a ghost. Whereas back in the 90s, by the time they came to that conclusion, it was because they had ruled out everything else on their own, and now they were pulling their hair out because none of those plausible, regular things like, you know, sometimes bad, you know, your electricity is going bad, and maybe that's why your bulbs flicker, or, you know, stuff like that. Back then, by the time you arrived, there was a very good chance that something was going on, even whether it was intelligent or residual. Versus now, it's like, you know, and now it's the other way around, where you have to kind of disappoint them and say, no, there's nothing, not really, no, you know, oh, you feel things like that. So that's yeah, I totally understand. My point being, I totally understand where you're coming from, as far as what you're saying, what the ghost hunting or the paranormal research or whatever you want to call it, things of that nature. And to be perfectly honest with you, I'm a big fan of the ghost story, as in sometimes everything doesn't have to be explained. What's the origin, who's the ghost, or how it ends. It's just a story. That's it.
Right. And take it as such and move on.
Right. I don't need a photograph. I don't need a recording. I don't, you know, it's just the story. It's a good story. It's a great story. And like you said, sometimes it's based on a story that we don't know how much fact is in it, but it's a great story of, you know, a supposed haunted house or a haunting or anything like that. And I think that sometimes that's, unfortunately, when you see a lot of these shows that they have a gazillion million gadgets, it's like, oh, come on, stop it.
Right.
It's like that kind of deal.
But, you know, I think we've passed the paranormal TV show, you know, heyday. I think there was that, you know, right when Ghost Hunters came out, and then Paranormal State, and then Ghost Adventures. Yes. You know, that was like 2004 to 2009. Everyone wanted a show. But I think we've seen a lull in that now. I mean, you flip through stations and, you know, people aren't gravitating towards it like they used to. And I think that maybe hopefully that's because, you know, we're moving away from that, you know, needing to have the evidence for it, and maybe just being willing to accept, you know, a little bit of paranormal mystery in our lives.
And that's enough to make
that.
I'll tell you this much. I think that Ghost Hunter, you know, one of the first ones was Ghost Hunters. And I think they kind of like did themselves a disservice, because even though it was really good, they debunked too much, and people were like, "Hey, when are you gonna?" they never found, you know. And I noticed that in these later incarnations, that they, not the Ghost Hunters, but the people that were in it to host, they tried to bend a little bit more, as in they're more accepting that there could actually be a ghost, because I think that it hurt them to always debunk everything.
Well, you watched it. I think you also watched in the beginning of the first season. They were trying to create a lot of drama too.
Oh yeah,
then I noticed that they kind of dropped off with that drama for a little bit, probably because they were making a little bit more room for saying like maybe this is a haunting. But I actually had a great idea for a ghost hunting show that I tried to pitch around, called Believer versus Skeptic.
Okay.
And my idea was it was like X-Files as a reality show. So there would be a Mulder and a Scully, you know, somebody who bases themselves in the science world and somebody who bases themselves a little bit more in the parascience world. And they would investigate not only ghosts, but legends, you know, folklore, haunted places, alien locations, that sort of thing.
Okay.
And I remember so funny that, you know, I submitted around, and I actually got some interest from some TV shows, like reality you know, TV show networks. But what cracked me up was the one common denominator was there wasn't a hook. So, like, I was like, well, what do you mean? They said, well, you know, I remember this one person was on the phone with me and goes, well, you know, I had done a sizzle reel, not a sizzle reel, but a teaser. And I showed like a picture of myself. I did a video investigation with a friend of mine. We investigated a Bigfoot hunting sighting in Florida, or a skunk ape sighting. And, you know, the friend of mine was she had two master degrees, or two doctorate degrees, one in biology and one in psychology. And then I myself was just a straight up investigator. And we went around, we investigated, we did a little sizzle thing, and we sent it in. And at the end, you know, the TV show network was like, look, it's a great idea, but you're missing your hook. And I go, what do you mean? They go, well, you're two, like, you know, pretty good looking, you know, people. But, you know, if you had been, like, if your friend had just been who she was, and you had been like a 50-year-old former Hell's Angel biker who had a brush with death, and we're coming back at this with like a new set of eyes, then, you know, then we'd have a TV show. But because you're both just so kind of vanilla, you know, it's, how can we make a show around this? So I realized pretty quickly too, I was like, well, okay, I guess the investigations aren't enough for you anymore. Now you've got to find these angles and these hooks. And, you know, Ghost Hunters, they had themselves as plumbers, so that was their angle. You know, they needed, you know, I wasn't going to wear a T-shirt that was 3 sizes too small for me, like Ghost Adventures. So, you know, that was the end of that. But I thought it was a cool idea for a show. Believer versus Skeptic. We would call it BS for short. And at the end of the episode, we would figure out if we stamped it Believer or Skeptic. So
let me ask you.
Yeah.
Because I live about, like you said, Gainesville. I live about 20 miles south of Gainesville. Is that Bigfoot story anywhere in my area, my neck of the woods?
No, this was more North Gainesville. So
really?
At a place called Devil's Millhopper. Yeah, it's outside. It's on the north end of Gainesville. It's called the Devil's Millhopper.
Really?
So it's a sinkhole that has a legend about a native maiden who was kidnapped by the devil, and the devil had fallen in love with her. So he transformed himself into a beast and snuck into her village and kidnapped her. And the native warriors chased after him into the night, and just as they were about to catch him, he spun around and turned them all into stone, and then he sunk into the ground and took the native maiden with him. And that sunken area that he sank into is now this huge sinkhole, and that if you go to the bottom of the sinkhole, you'll find these rocks that are trickling the Florida aquifer water out of them. And they say those are the stones of the former brave warriors as they cry for their lost maiden. and that in the night, at midnight, if it's a full moon, you can still hear her screams as she's dragged down into hell. And at the bottom of the Devil's Mill Hopper, archaeologists and pioneers have found bones, likely from, prehistoric tribes that have come through the area. Maybe that's where they buried their dead. But it was on that road leading to the Devil's Mill Hopper that a friend of mine and I, back in high school, had seen what I swear and what he swears, and he's not a believer of the paranormal at all, a Bigfoot or a skunk ape run right across the street, right in front of us. Dark street, rural road, no lights, nothing. But as our headlights approached, you saw this thing running on two legs right across the road. And it wasn't a bear. It wasn't a deer. I've seen deer bound across a road.
Yes.
This was a bipedal figure that was running right across the length of the road. It almost looked like an NBA player wearing a giant gray fur coat. And I read later, I actually spoke with members of the BFRO, the Bigfoot Research Organization, and they had adamantly claimed that Florida is actually one of the largest, areas of Bigfoot sightings outside of California and Washington State.
Right, because I was going to say Pacific Northwest is the one you always think of as the premier place for Bigfoot sightings. Right.
Or Sasquatch.
Well, Sasquatch.
They call it up over there. But there's all sorts of Bigfoots, different areas. Yeah, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, the Green Man,
Yes.
Skunk Ape is what it's known down in Florida. So, so that's the one thing. I always tell people I've never really seen a ghost, but I can tell you unabashedly that I have seen Bigfoot.
Wow.
And he's alive and well.
You got to come back on the show and tell me the Gainesville ghost stories, because I know there's a lot of stuff out here.
Yeah.
It's really funny because there's about a month ago, like all places, I went to a beauty salon because I moved up here like a year. No, that's like less than a year was, and a beauty salon of all places, and we got to, I got talking to the ladies doing my hair, and I tell her because I used to. She goes, "You do? Hold on, wait a minute." She runs back and gets the owner. You know how that goes. Turns out at one time she tried to form a group, but it never worked out. But she was telling me, around here there's a lot of these small cemeteries, and I don't know if you're familiar with McIntosh, which is between.
I know of McIntosh, yeah.
Okay. She was telling me about the cemetery at McIntosh, that it's got some weird stuff going on there, and yeah. So, yeah. I'm hoping.
I'd love to come back on the show. We can talk about Gainesville. We can talk about St. Augustine.
Yes.
We can talk more about the books then too. So
yes.
It's always a pleasure to talk with people about the paranormal. Especially those who are more in the know than the others. So
yes, absolutely.
I'm just so used to dealing with tourists who are like, "So you ever seen a ghost before? What is a ghost?" And then you have to walk them through the whole story of it. But yeah, I'd love to come back. I'd be honored.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Andre, and I want to wish you a lot of luck. I'll be getting in touch with you soon so we can set up. So we'll do the north central Florida, folklore, haunted ghost stuff. There's a lot of stuff out here. Believe me, stuff that I found out.
There's a great legend. Have you ever heard the legend of Tailybone?
No. What is that?
Then we'll have to talk about Tailybone.
No, I'm sorry. You're gonna have to talk about it right now. Sorry, you can't do that. You can't do that.
So we'll end it with the legend of Tailybone for your show.
Yes,
so,
yes.
The legend is there was an old, this is like based in the North Florida area, but there was an old cracker who used to live in the woods. This old kind of hermit. He lived in this little old cabin shack. And, he only relied on an occasional courier to come and deliver him some goods that he needed, but he lived there with his 3 dogs. And the legend goes that one night as he was cooking himself some dinner, he saw this unusual creature come through the planks and the broken parts of his cabin. This huge, almost like a weird skunk rat, raccoon-like looking creature with this gnarly tail hanging from it that almost looked like an alligator tail. And he didn't know what it was, but he threw his hatchet at it and cut the tail off of the creature, and the creature went screaming into the night. And, he didn't know what to do. He didn't know where this creature went, but he saw this tail laying here, and he needed some meat for his stew. So he cooked the meat up, put it in his stew, ate it. Well, that night as he's asleep in bed in the middle of the woods, he hears this haunting voice. Taylor-bone, Taylor-bone, who's got my Taylor-bone? And he saw this creature's eyes coming through that same, crack in his cabin, and he goes, I don't know, I don't have your tailbone. Nobody has your tailbone here. You better get. And he sends his dogs after this thing, and the thing goes running with, just runs into the woods. And so later, his dogs return, but it's only 2 of them. One of them's disappeared, never came back. So he's lying in his bed. He's got his 2 dogs with him. And again, in the dead of night, he hears, Tailbone, Tailbone, who has my Tailbone? And he sees the creature in the eyes, and it's getting closer to his bed. And he goes, I ain't got your Tailbone. I don't have your Tailbone. Get. And sends the 2 dogs after him. The dogs go after him. Tailbone creature goes running and disappears. Later, 1 dog comes back. So the man's sitting there with his 1 dog and trembling with him, and then suddenly in the dead of the night he hears, Tailbone, Tailbone, who has my Tailbone? And he sees the creature is just feet away from his bed, and he goes, I got your Tailbone, now get. And the dog goes running after him, never comes back. So he's sitting there in bed, and he's trembling. He's, what's going to happen? It's just hours away from dawn, and suddenly he hears in the dead of the night, Tailbone, Tailbone. And then suddenly he sees the fingers of the creature kind of curl around the edge of his bed, and the eyes peek up, and he goes, who's got my Tailbone? And the old man is just horrified with fear. He can't even say anything. And then suddenly the little finger points at him and goes, who has my Tailbone? Attacks the man, and the man goes screaming, and that's it. A few days later, that courier comes to deliver his goods to the old man in his cabin, and the cabin is literally shredded apart. There's nothing left, not even a scrap of the man's clothing, and no one ever knows what got it. But the courier said as he was leaving into the woods, he heard somebody in the distance say, I got my Tailbone.
Oh,
And that was the story of Tailbone.
you're you're a superb storyteller. You know that, right? You must get a lot of good tips on your tours. You're great. You're fantastic, Andre. Thank you.
The last time I told that story, last time I told that story was with my friends around a campfire on Cumberland Island, which is off the coast of Georgia. And it's a fun little campground, but when you're on that ground, you're the only people because it's an island. You can't get off the island once they leave you there. And I told that story to my friends, and throughout the whole night, whenever we'd have to walk to the bathrooms, because the bathrooms are 30 yards away from our campground, there was tons of other people camping in the woods around us, but just for giggles, we would be like to each other, Tailbone, Tailbone. Like just into the night. God knows what people were thinking when they were there.
I bet there was a lot of people like, how long can I hold this? I'm not getting up.
Right. I'm just going to hold my bladder.
Yes, that's right. I'm going to. Andre, it has been wonderful to speak to you. I want to wish
you the best. We gave the toilets a break that night. So.
I know.
Thank you so much.
Take care, darling.
Thank you so
You've been
much.
wonderful. Bye-bye.
You too. Happy Halloween.
Likewise. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh, wow. I love those stories. I love it. That's what I mean. Those are the kind of stories that I like because it's like, you could tell I'm a real sucker for stories, especially that type. You know what? And I agree with him. When he was talking about when it comes to paranormal research and studies and all that. Don't get me wrong. A lot of people say, well, Marlene, yes, I know that in paranormal research, especially after the reality shows, when everybody was trying to like elbow the other person out of the way to get a show or to make, stuff was made up. Let's call it what it is. And the problem with that, as far as being accurate, is that the nature of the supernatural is that it's not an on-demand thing. Okay, it's not an on-demand thing. I'm going to tell you something. Same thing, and I've said it before, even with psychics. When you hear of like them being debunked, or way back when with spiritualism was a big deal, that even Houdini was, and some of these spiritualists, they had this reputation. And I tell everybody, you know what? I bet you some of these psychics that were busted supposedly for being fraudulent, and maybe it's not that they weren't psychic, it's that you just cannot sometimes produce results, especially like on whim, just because of the nature of what it is. Where, let's say, my psychic abilities, it's what's paying my rent, and sometimes it just, there's times when you're there, and then there's times when it doesn't, and that's when people make things up. So same thing with the nature of the supernatural, the paranormal. If you're investigating it, especially if you're trying to produce a show and you've got X amount of days, and you better have something so that people go, ooh, that's when a lot of things are, what's the most appropriate word for this? Manufactured? I don't know. Exaggerated? I don't know. I don't know what to call it. But anyway, not entirely truthful. Like I was telling him, because of somebody like myself who's done this knows that 9 times out of 10, you will go to places that sometimes might have something there, but you will go and it's just nothing's happening. Not even a weird feeling, okay? Not even a weird feeling. And you might go another day, and it's everything from the moment you get off your vehicle. It's like it's on, and you're like, what? And you ask yourself, what is the difference between, let's say, 1 week and the next? If you return, what happened? Sometimes you never have an answer to that question. Why? Sometimes there's manifestations or feelings or whatever, and then other times it's like, oh, nothing happening here. It's like, oh, yawn. But for all these, that's what I'm saying. The paranormal reality shows made paranormal more mainstream, but at the same time, so much gadgets. They kind of it was a romantic kind of pursuit. In the sense of, when I say romantic, I don't mean like as in love interest. It was romanticized in the sense of everybody liked the good ghost stories. And then you had people retelling how they had experiences, not because they were being a paranormal researcher, just things would happen to them. They would see things that they didn't expect, and they would retell it. Things of that nature. And I want to say a lot of the attraction, I think, for us, especially now in modern times, is that we have too much technology, and I think that the human soul always yearns for mystery, for something that's not exactly totally explained. And by this, I don't think that we might want to be lied to, but let me tell you something. Everybody that just listening to a story, whether it's true or not, or exaggerated, or, hey, did you capture it? That doesn't matter. I think everybody yearns for that, especially around this time of year, Halloween time. So again, guys, I hope you like this show. I love speaking to Andre. I'm going to bring him back because he's going to let me know about a lot of places around here so I can go look. That's another thing. I'm planning to go do some cemetery walks in this area. Like I said, when I was in Miami, when you grow up in an area, you know every place to go to. Here, I'm basically a year later is when I've really finally gotten down to, what's the word for it? Everything being kind of in this place where I can actually schedule some, how can I say, not trips, but, some investigations outside of, in this general area. And I would definitely got to talk to him because, see, he can turn me on to local places that nobody knows about. Especially like that Devil's, what was it? Pond Hopper, Mill Hopper, Devil's, I got to look that up. See, I'm fascinated with that. You have no idea. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for being part of my audience. Come back every week. I have a lot of fantastic people coming on the show. New ones like Andre, repeat guests from before that you guys have told me that you wanted to have them come back. Like I said, hopefully also I'm going to be doing some cemetery walks or maybe investigations out here. Let me see what I can come up with. You know, that's another thing you got to be careful also. Like when you go out to these places, you got to make sure you're not trespassing. You know, you don't want to get in trouble doing any of that. So what is it? You got to make sure your logistics are in order. And again, if you want to listen to any of the podcast versions of the shows, you go to miamighostchronicles.com. There is a tab there for my non-ad. It's the I go ahead and I save MP3 files of any of the shows, and of course those don't have any commercial interruptions. And yeah, I have a link there that will take you to that page, and you can search for any show in particular. And of course, the first ones at the top are the newest ones. You can listen to it on your browser. You can download the MP3 file. But again, I have links to the different podcast platforms where you can hear the show, iHeart, Stitcher, Spreaker, Mixcloud, iTunes. I'm on all of those. You can find not only Stories of the Supernatural, but Nightshade Diary and Supernatural Storytime. And again, if you want to also subscribe to my newsletter, by all means, go ahead and do so. And I will keep you updated with some funky stories of my own, some articles that I write along the way. Because that's my bag, baby. I write. So again, take care. Probably by the time you hear this, I think Halloween might be over, but just in case, happy Halloween.